So I am super excited to welcome you to the next episode of Entrepreneurial Excellence and to have a good friend, colleague, and actually someone, funny enough, I've really only met once or twice in person, actually. But that's the new world we, of course, live in, despite us only living maybe, an hour and a half apart from each other in California. But Ryan Micheletti, who is someone who has his hands in more things than I know almost anyone can keep on top of, and yet he is on top of all of it, it seems. But also really cool about Ryan is he is someone who has had the luck, fortune, or just putting himself in the right place of founding 4 companies, also being a venture investor, having different funds he's worked at, you name it, he's sort of done it all. And I'm just really excited, Ryan, to have you here today with me. I know I'm going to learn a ton, so I hope our audience will learn a ton as well. But thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite. I'm excited to be here. And, I guess you could say that we're COVID buddies. We started like mentoring and working with companies together during the pandemic, and we haven't stopped since.
It's so true. It's come faster and faster, and maybe arguably it's going to continue to accelerate, right? We're moving into a world, I believe, of greater entrepreneurship and more entrepreneurs, which is, hence the focus really of this podcast and interview series, is that more and more entrepreneurs are going to exist in the world, and how do we help each one of them become better? So, and on that note, maybe a good segue into talking a little bit about, like, Ryan, you founded a few companies. Think about 4 companies you founded. That makes you on par with me on the level of insanity that we have to actually be a founder 4 times. Like, I'm not sure what craziness goes on in our heads, but walk me through, those 4 different ones, right? Shield Corp, Luminaire, your vet tech, startup, accelerator, the veteran fund now, and of course working at Founders Institute as well. What made you want to start those? How did you even get into it? You were in the military before. What made you then say, "Hey, I'm going to go do this crazy thing and start companies"? Like, why? And walk me through even each one, but starting with that whole thesis.
It's a really good question. So I'll kind of start at the beginning. So I think on the luck and fortune side, I was born and raised in Silicon Valley. I grew up one freeway exit from Sand Hill Road. And I always would drive by it. And I was like, what is Sand Hill Road? Like when I was younger, I was like, oh, like, is it like
is it a sandy hill? Is there like a hill with sand on it I can play on?
Yeah. So I think like, dumb luck, I was like there. So I was like, okay, like the setting's right. And I'd always thought about, what is it that I want to do with my life? I've always had this kind of like introspection of like, what am I supposed to be doing? And I knew that if I wanted to make the most impact, I needed to be on the forefront of innovation. And so, growing up in Redwood City in like the early 90s, I was exposed to kind of seeing what was happening in like the development of the tech ecosystem, even though I was an outsider looking in. And so when I was in college, I kind of made the decision
Were your parents at all involved in tech in any way, or you just were like in the area and it sort of was in the water sort of thing?
Yeah, it was just they were not. So it was just something that had always been of interest to me. And I knew that, getting into tech that early was definitely like the wave you're supposed to ride. So if you can get in the sort of the right wave that's growing, then you're going to grow as well. And that momentum will carry you.
Is that actually a lesson even right there? Is sort of find the wave that, well, hopefully most important, excites you, number one, but also like a growing wave. And that will lead to more things, sort of the abundance mindset to some extent.
1,000%. Because at the end of the day, you need to do something that you care about. And if you do something you care about, you're willing to put in the time and the work and the energy that it'll actually take to be successful. And it's not that you need to work a 12-hour day. I mean, some people do that and that's great, but it's more about consistency over time. Because like you can't rush certain things on your success trajectory. Some things just unfold over time. And so you want to make sure that you're playing in the right playground, because if that's growing, then you're going to be in the right place at the right time when the opportunities come up.
Is that sort of the thesis, right? People talk a lot about like luck, and certainly I work with people and you just in your career, you come across people like, oh, you're so lucky. And what I try to say to folks is it's not about luck. You make your own luck, is at least my entrepreneurial mindset. You make your own luck because you're in the right place at the right time. Is that sort of what you've seen too? Is like you got lucky to be born in Silicon Valley, sure. But you could have chosen to do a million things and moved a million places in the world, and yet you didn't. And so you started creating your own luck, and now you've had this amazing career, and obviously so much more to go still to do. But is that part of it? It's just like you create your own luck.
Absolutely. I think creating your own luck is a very big piece of that. Um, when I really first started, like when I was in college, actually, I was working in a warehouse as like a blue collar worker, eventually moving my way up doing sales. And what was interesting about that is it kind of exposed me to like starting from like the very ground floor and then having to like work your way up into, an organization. And I think that, the make your own luck piece is really important. Sure, there's things that happen, that seemingly, that are lucky, but I think it really is about showing up early, putting in good work and being consistent. And if you do that across anything, whether it's sports or working out or learning a skill or art, you're going to become great at some point. And so you just have to really, like, my advice to people is, especially the younger generation, find what you like and what you care about, and then just do that for a decade, and you're for sure going to have success as long as you're relatively competent and you put in the time and energy to do the work.
So I totally agree with the question. I guess to you is sort of like what you're talking about kind of relates to sort of the passion hypothesis, right? A lot of people are like, oh, I just need to find my passion. And my take, and I've read this from other places, I mean, it's not an original take to some extent, is that the idea of finding your passion isn't a real thing. Your passion becomes what you get good at. And then when you get good at it, it starts to become your passion because you start getting the accolades. People start talking. You've been able to create your own VC fund and do all these things, not because you were passionate about handing money out to entrepreneurs per se, but because you set yourself up to be in that position. And now, yeah, it's a ton of fun. I'm sure you get a real lot of joy in it every day.
100%.
But that became your passion because you actually worked at it for, I don't know, 15, 20 years now.
Yeah, and I think there's something along the lines of you don't know where you're going to end up and what that ultimate passion will come to. I can tell you that the work I do at the Veteran Fund is extremely fulfilling, and it's essentially a dream job. If I were to go back 20 years and tell little Ryan that someday you're going to be investing in veteran-led startups that are protecting America and have to be like defense and national security focused, I'd be like, damn, that's a dream job. Like, that's amazing. Like, but how do you get from A to Z, right? It was not a straight line. It was definitely a zigzag of like kind of meandering around and figuring it out along the way.
So is the thesis, like, just to go to stay on this point a little bit, one thing I've talked to a lot of folks about is I think there's this mindset that people think, oh, an entrepreneur is someone different or special than me. But I would actually disagree. Like, I think everyone is an entrepreneur for themselves. At minimum, you're an entrepreneur of one for your own career, your own trajectory. So is what you're sort of saying basically like, hey, like, grab your career and say, I'm going to guide this the direction I want to go, and be an entrepreneur about it. So like when you compare yourself to the other blue collar workers in that first job who might still be in that job today, what was a differentiating factor you think that you had versus them to put you in the place you're in today, where you're running a fund, you have all these different companies you're doing stuff with? What is that differentiator that enabled you to have sort of entrepreneurial excellence, but for your own career?
It's a combination of two things. So one is horsepower, and how I would define that is, in order to improve, you always need to do one more rep, whether it's pull-ups or staying an extra 15 minutes at the office or showing up 15 minutes earlier, or like sending one more email, doing one more sales call. Like, just that little tiny piece of doing one more thing, when that's compounded over 10 years, it's exponential success. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece is you also have to have a vision of where you want to go. The reality is, you might say, oh, I want to become a venture capitalist that invests in defense tech companies. That's great, and you can certainly work to get there, but there's also a certain level of uncertainty that you don't know exactly that pathway to get there. And so you just sort of need a general direction. And then what will happen is you'll meet people along your path that maybe other opportunities or other doors open, and then you go and pursue those, and then that leads to other opportunities. So I think just having a general direction that you want to head is important. And you don't necessarily need to know the final destination. Most people don't. When you ask them what they want to do, they have no idea. And that's perfectly okay, because you're going to learn as you go and figure it out along the way. But you have to take the first step, and you have to go out and do the work.
Yeah. And is the other part to not only have to take the step and do the work, you have to have some goal in mind or some place you're trying to head, right? You might not know that is like your end goal. I mean, like I will say, like I kind of laugh at it now. Like my goal, this sounds so silly, but my goal for a long time, like I wanted to be like CEO of Microsoft. Like that was my dream when I was a young kid. Was like I'm going to be CEO of Microsoft, and that was like a big deal, sort of thing. And it still would be, frankly, if I were CEO of Microsoft, it'd be a big deal. Um, but that was like my plan, and I'm nowhere close to that. And I'm actually very happy that I'm not. I love my career and the stuff that I've been able to pull off. It's gone very different. Like I'm working in startups essentially my whole career now. But I had a general plan in mind, and there are a lot of things you needed to do to sort of head in that direction and attempt to go that way. And that has led to these other opportunities that I've had.
Yeah, that's a good point. When I was, so I started working at a company called CalSteam when I think it was 15. It was like a summer job. And after working there, I was like, one day I'm going to be the president of this company. And it was it was a wholesale plumbing supply company that, probably makes like, 50 to $100 million in revenue or something like that, which is great. But that was like my short-term vision. And then as you grow, you evolve and you change, and that's okay. But you also need to make sure you're open and flexible in your vision and where you want to go.
So do you think, I mean, saying that, so then thinking about that, like that being open and flexible, walk me through how you decided to go from these sort of jobs you had, sort of blue collar jobs, being in the military, to actually saying, I'm going to go found like Shield Corps
Yeah.
and build that out. And you did that with your brother, I think, as well, right?
Yeah, my brother and I co-founded it. It's over 10 years ago now. Still running and doing really well today.
What does it do?
Shield Core is a physical security company. So when we started it, just like any kind of someone in their early 20s would think, we wanted to do like bars and nightclubs and event security, and we're like, that's really cool. Like we're gonna get into so many fun parties. And
I was gonna say, it's just like you thought that was like a way to get in for free to the parties and get to go to all the cool things.
Exactly. And it was, but after doing that for, I don't know how long it was when we pivoted, but probably like 6 or 7 years. We did the Super Bowl 50 party at Pier 70 with like, tons of celebrities. We've done 10,000 person Halloween raves. We did Dreamforce. We did TechCrunch Disrupt. So we were like at the heart of like events in San Francisco, providing security guards and physical security. And it culminated in 2019. We were rated the number 2 veteran-owned business in the Bay Area, and so that was a great achievement for us. But at that point, we're just kind of burnt out after getting a bunch of calls on a Friday night of, oh, this employee did this, or someone smashed a bottle over someone else's head, and it's just like, okay, time to move on. And so we pivoted away from events and bars and nightclubs into more, we're like, okay, what's a good business that's boring where we're not going to get like calls in the middle of the night? And so we pivoted to construction security, as well as corporate security, which is a much better business model for a variety of reasons. And so what was cool is, even though my main focus had always been in tech and focused on venture backable startups, the finance person in me was like, okay, I need to de-risk. I need to have a service-based company that makes money, that can actually add value to our life in terms of like bottom line profit and being able to grow it. And I think like the core fundamentals of business are the same across a lot of different industries. There's nuances between venture-backed companies and service-based companies, but at the end of the day, you need to hire people, you need to grow the company, you need to make payroll. So there's this like core operational function and sort of framework that you learn just building and growing a business.
And what are the things when you first started that? With Shield Corp, by the way, was that your first company, or were there ones before that too?
I think I started vet tech before Shield Core.
Okay.
And before that, I had been working with a bunch of early stage tech startups, like trying to raise money and go the accelerator route. My very first company, actually, I was 14 years old, and I love, as you can tell, I like playing guitar. And my friend and I figured out how to change the humbuckers, which are like the little pickups on the guitar, and like switch out the pick guard to like do, make it look cool. So we started Tar Custom Guitars. It's for Tyler and Ryan Custom Guitars.
Awesome.
And we like would take my friends' guitars, and like I think we probably messed up the electronics inside, but somehow it ended up working. And I think we did like 4 or 5 custom guitars, and that was our first business. I think I still have the business card somewhere around here.
It's freaking amazing. And what do you, I mean, I love that. Just you started it so young, and then it was just like you obviously in your blood a little bit. What are lessons you learned, you think, from that and mistakes that you made that led then also to what you built with Shield Corp and like everything else? Like, what are there, yeah, like think about like what did you do right? What did you do wrong in all
Yeah.
those different steps? Because like there are handbooks for some of this, but not really. Like what are the things that make for a great entrepreneur? And I don't know if you, I mean, you might not call yourself that, but I still call you that. So
Well, I appreciate that. I think the one of the biggest lessons I learned, like in Silicon Valley, specifically working with tech startups, is knowing, not going down the fundraising route until you're actually ready to do it, because it will kill a company. The very first startup I worked on was actually my chief warrant officer in the military who recruited me to work with him on it. This was during the whole Groupon phase, and so we were doing this like daily deals thing that put the power in the restaurant owners' hands, and we thought it was a good model. And but I'd never done a tech startup. I was kind of taking his lead. He was like, "Yeah, we're going to go and we're just going to raise $2 million on this idea." And after kind of like chasing that for 6 months, it just ended up killing the company because we had a product, but it wasn't really being used, and we needed money to grow it. And so the big lesson for me at that point was like, okay, like no one's going to hand you free money just because you have an idea. And you have to make sure that you hit certain thresholds and benchmarks in order to raise capital.
in why even try to go raise money for that? Like I get sort of that idea made sense to raise money for it, but you did with Winston Shield Corp. I assume you didn't raise any money and you
No.
need to. Why go that route? Like what are the things that entrepreneurs should be considering between should I raise money, should I not raise money? Which model's better or worse?
It really depends. I actually tell founders not to raise money when they have the luxury to do so. In order to be good at raising money, you need to be in the top 10% of deals that investors see, because you're going to get so many no's. Even if you're a really good company, you're going to get a lot of no's. And so you want to make sure you've got your full-time team, you've got a good product that's been validated by your customers, and you've got some traction, whether it's revenue or pilots or whatever that looks like, something to prove that your core assumptions that business will work. And if you don't have any of that, you shouldn't be raising money. You should be building your team. And once you have a team, you should be leveraging that team to build the product. And once you have the product, you should be going out and trying to get traction. And once you have traction, then you might be able to raise money to then help you get to that next inflection point, that next stage. But at the end of the day, it's all about growth and scalability. So you should only raise capital if you're going to use that money to grow, and if you have a business model that's highly scalable. Otherwise, you're honestly better off just making a profitable company and growing it that way, retaining your ownership. And depending on how many co-founders you have, I mean, I have a friend who had a relatively small exit. It was around 55 or $60 million. He walked away with $35 million because he didn't raise capital, and he did it in 4 years. So, compare that to some like unicorn founders who like spend 10 years on it, but they have like 1% of the company. It's a toss up to say which one is better. But I think at the end of the day, like what's been the way I would measure success is the joy that it brings you. When we started Shield Core, I was working over 12-hour overnight shifts in my car at an old warehouse in San Francisco, basically bootstrapping the company to get us cash flow positive so that we can then go and hire people. And that was totally stressful. Money is very stressful when it comes to startups. And so I think if you can generate revenue, if you could keep your burn low, you're in a much better headspace to then go out and figure out, okay, do I want to dilute my equity to bring on more team members to grow? Do I want to go out and raise money? What is that strategy? But you need that firm foundation in order for you to do it in a way that's healthy for you and healthy for the business.
Totally. In sort of related to that, but like walk me through, the team itself. So when you talk about team, going back, I'm going to keep saying on Shield Core for a second, but like you did it with your brother. That can be, I mean, it depends on your relationship with your brother, I suppose. My brother and I love each other, but of course fight a ton. That can be really risky because frankly, founders, I bet it's more than 50% of founders have a breakup at some point. And you're founding a company with your brother, you're stressed about funds and money. Why did you sort of choose him as your co-founder? what qualities do you think that everyone should look at for or with a co-founder? And then would you do it again with your brother too? If he ever listens to this, I don't know what he'll
Yeah.
say, but like,
I mean, when we started, it's that typical stereotype that is, oh, don't start a business with your family because, it'll ruin your relationship. I actually found it to be the exact opposite. I think it actually brought us closer together. So it depends on the dynamic. Like, we always had a great relationship. We both served in the military, and the way we looked at it was, our greater mission as brothers isn't to start the company. The company was one tool in our toolkit and in our greater vision of like, how do we go out and create wealth for ourselves and our families? And so, like, having that bigger mission and having that like higher, sort of better foundation, I would say, made it a lot easier to navigate kind of the hard conversations, and also making sure you have a very clear like pecking order. From the very beginning, I told Zach, my brother, that he's the CEO. He has the final call. I will help him and I'll do whatever I can. But at the end of the day, like, I will go with whatever he decides. And because of that, there's never really been any ego. There's been times where we've not agreed on certain aspects of like how we should build the business or what we should focus on, but then we just talk about it. And then, both of us are pretty rational. So we make the right decision, and it's served us very well.
was that tough? I mean, tough in a sense for like your own ego, right? It's a lot of people, it's difficult for people. If you're starting a business, you're pouring your life and energy into that business. And then to say, you know what, like, I'm going to let this other person who in many cases is not your brother, you don't know them that well, have the final say. Like, that's really scary. You're putting so much time and energy into something, and then you're like, they're in charge.
That also goes down to like good team building, because through some other just experiences with startups, what I found is one person might be more motivated to do work than the other, but you have to go in with the right expectations. So there was a company I was working with a long time ago where I wanted to be more of like the support person and help, but not lead the charge. And then I found myself ending up being the one having to lead everything. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, like, I didn't sign up to be the CEO of this project. So we ended up just like, I like, respectfully, I just kind of like bowed out and just like, we wound it down, because I wasn't seeing the initiative from the other person to go and make that company successful. And so you really want to find the right, and as an investor, that's what we look for. I look for people who, their life purpose is tied to what they do, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to make the company successful.
Do you prefer companies that have a co-founder, multiple co-founders, or ones that are sole founders?
Yeah, for sure, co-founder, for many reasons. It's such a painful solo co-founder journey, and then there's also risk.
Lonely.
Like, what if that person gets hit by a bus? What if that person doesn't have the right skill set? And so, ideally, at least two co-founders, ideally three. You want to make sure that one of them is technical. You want to make sure they're not throwing money away on like development partners. Because once the company runs out of money, if you can't continue to build the product, the company will most likely fail. And so I don't have the exact statistics, but you see these organizations and you see like, some just anecdotally, sometimes being a solo co-founder can lead to higher levels of failure because of burnout, because of the loneliness, because of not having the right diversity of skill sets. And then also, my very first experience with that company I mentioned earlier, the Daily Deals one, none of us were technical. So we were like, we're going to raise $2 million and then find some developer to like build this for us. And it doesn't work. Like, we should not have been doing that business because we couldn't build it without outside capital. And so even if you are a venture backable startup, you need to build the business without capital. And if you can do that and then raise capital, you're in a good position. But if you are relying on money to make it work, you're almost dead on arrival immediately.
So that's kind of a good point then, is maybe part of being a great entrepreneur, understanding and recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses and your own skills and abilities, and being realistic about it, right? Yes, I do think founders all have to have a level of insanity to some extent, and a level of like sort of reality distortion to even just try to go build to have the belief that you can go build something that doesn't exist and people are going to buy it and spend money on it is a little bit crazy, right? Because theoretically, in a free market capitalist system, all those little niches have already been filled, and yet founders are starting companies every single day. Is there sort of, a founder needs to be willing to understand, like, take that risk and say, you know what, I think this needs to exist. Is that sort of that mindset that they should take? Like, and once again, knowing yourself, knowing it needs to exist, but knowing like I'm the right person for this and I can go get this done without cash.
Right. And I think that's sort of the pitfall of like the business co-founder, which is, man, I've got this great idea. And it's like, yeah, that daily deals app is a good idea, but are you the person that is going to be the master of that domain to go out and make it work? And it really wasn't until we started the Veteran Fund where I felt that founder product fit, where I'm like, actually, yeah, I am the master of this domain because I've been doing it for 10 years.
Yep.
And so, and then that just made everything from fundraising to finding deals to adding value so much easier because you are that person with high credibility with what you're doing. So, bottom line is, don't just chase opportunity, chase the right opportunity and make sure it's aligned with what you ultimately want to do.
Well, and then because, I mean, to your point, in a sense with Veteran Fund, everything compounds on top of itself, right? What you said before, it all compounds. So you're now an expert, you know this, there's a real clear founder market fit because you know it so well and you've been at it for so long. I mean, sort of the same thing with me and Levy and what I've been doing, all that fits really well. And now I'm pretty experienced at this stuff and I know it really well. And there is that credibility. So walk me through a little bit more. So, okay, so Shield Corp, then Illuminaire, Vet Tech Fund, Veteran Fund. Why go start all of these? And I think a bunch of these are still running too, right? So you have like your hands in so many different things. What was the thesis in your head saying, I'm going to go start one thing after the next? You have a family, you have all these things going on in your life, and yet you also have 4 extra babies and companies that you've run and started.
Yeah. Sometimes when I look at all the stuff, like when I kind of do a, recollection, I'm like, wow, I've been around the block, which I really don't think of myself as that. I really, kind of take a more humble approach to it because you always have other things to learn. But so it all really started actually in the military. And I mentioned that the very first startup I joined was led by my chief warrant officer. And, the kind of short version on that is that I did 6 years in the California Guard. I never deployed overseas, but I built a search and rescue team for the state. And within that search and rescue context, I went to this survival school called the Tom Brown Tracker School out in the East Coast. And it was all about kind of not only like wilderness survival and tracking, but it was also kind of like wayfinding, like land navigation. And when I was young, I was like, I could use some of these principles in trying to navigate my life and figure out where I want to go. So yes, I want to be a tech billionaire. Great. Okay, so how do I do that? And so, some of those skills, I think have helped a lot in just navigating this treacherous terrain. But probably the biggest one is perseverance and resilience, because those things are necessary because there's going to be a lot of highs and a lot of lows and you got to ride them out, and you have to be able to like wake up the next day and do it all again. And so I feel like a lot of people talk about that and it's hard to do. Especially in the first, I would say 4 years. The first 4 years, I was a starving entrepreneur for sure. I've seen all my friends like making money, doing sales or whatever at tech companies. And I just was like, you know what? No, this is the path that I'm on. And I know the compounding effects that will happen. Every ounce of energy that I'm putting into this will pay off. And the problem with like startups is that, yes, it's high growth, but you're not really going to feel the success effects in terms of like making money and actually like having that for 2 to 4 years. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are sort of they don't really realize that. They think, okay, I'm going to quit my job, and then within a year we're going to build this product and we're going to raise $1 million, and then I'm going to pay myself $150,000 a year. It's like, actually, some bad news. Like, you should probably be paying yourself, if you can get to that point in a year, you should probably be paying yourself $60,000 a year. And then maybe 2 years after that, when you go and raise like a $4 million round, maybe you can bump it up to like 80 to 100. And then Series A and beyond is like when you might be able to start making a little bit more. But it's, it is a long, hard journey, and you really have to pay your dues. And so I was doing that for 4 years, just kind of wandering around Silicon Valley, working with different people in different projects. And I think that was actually probably that time, even though it was like a little bit dark trying to like make my way, that's where I got so much free education and building the networks. I wasn't tied down to anything. I was able to just insert myself and be able to like work with different startups and be able to like meet all these great people. And so, when there was a point in time where the first startup I was with failed. And I started working with another one. And then that company was headquartered at the Plug and Play Tech Center. And so I started going there and working with, meeting people and working with a couple different startups. And that's where I met my co-founder in vet tech. His name was Bo Rogers. He was a Vietnam veteran, former group president of Sprint, investor, entrepreneur, just really great person. And we realized that, and this is going back to I think 2011, 2012,
Yeah.
that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were raging. There was high veteran unemployment, but the Kauffman Foundation did a study that there's a 2.1 multiplier effect for every tech job that gets created in the ecosystem. 2.1 jobs to support that one tech job are also created.
Wow.
So we thought, okay, the best way to solve veteran unemployment is to create tech jobs, specifically with veterans, because veterans like helping veterans. So there was no veteran ecosystem at the time. There was, some business plan writing workshops, by the VA and very not even 1.0, version 0.5. And so we decided to start Vet Tech. And that was the first military veteran startup accelerator in Silicon Valley, based out of the Plug and Play Tech Center. And that's where I think things really started to take off. I was still not making any money, and I was hoping we would go out and raise some nonprofit dollars. But we made a little bit of equity, and we launched some great companies and worked with some great folks. Some of them are still around today. We launched Instant Teams, which is the top military spouse startup in the world right now. There's a few others. But that was really where I started to go hands-on and get more into the ecosystem building side rather than the founder side. And at that time, I was still playing founder with ShieldCore. So I was able to bootstrap my life where, okay, ShieldCore is profitable and growing. Vet Tech was collecting equity, and that's sort of the long-term success. And then in 2015, I got the opportunity to take the work I was doing at Vet Tech and bring it into the Founder Institute as one of their operational leaders. And so now we had not only the Plug and Play Tech Center, but also Founder Institute as two massive international rocket engines of innovation. And here my little veteran platform was the connection point between the two. And so that enabled us to really kind of grow the veteran startup ecosystem, running free programs, creating scholarships, and helping veterans raise capital and build their businesses.
And what I mean, one of the things that I try to tell entrepreneurs is you need to be really focused to be successful. Yet what you're sort of saying is actually the opposite. You've actually done a ton of different startups almost all at the same time. How do you explain that or square those two things, right? My advice could obviously be completely wrong, but how do you explain that to people?
So, all right, I'll give you a dose of the real right now.
That's what we want.
So, and in that first startup, I noticed a weird dynamic. They were arguing over who was going to be the CEO. And here I am with a young 20-year-old or however old I was, with this group of relatively seasoned, working professionals. They're arguing over the CEO position, not because they all wanted to be the CEO, because no one wanted to be the CEO. And I was like, I wonder why.
Yep.
And it wasn't until later on I realized, because you shoulder the entire burden, and it's exactly like Elon Musk says, it's chewing glass and staring into the abyss. And you have to figure out every single day what it is you're supposed to do. So that actually taught me, okay. And so I went to school for finance. So, what's the big takeaway in finance? Diversification. So you can either become a billionaire tech founder by being the CEO and putting all of your eggs in one basket and growing that. And you could maybe be the 0.001% that do that. Or you could take more of a basket approach and work with multiple startups and diversify to try and get that success. And so if you're working on something that you really care about or are passionate about, 100% focus on it. That should be your level of success. I took more of a almost an investor mindset, which is I need to launch a lot of startups to be able to get to where I want to go in a de-risked way. Now, I think it took a little bit longer to see the success from that, because startups are just, especially at the very beginning, it takes a while for them to get traction.
Yep.
And you also don't have a lot of control, but that's where the volume play kind of came in. And so I always looked at it more from that angle of diversification rather than concentrating everything into one piece.
To me, that's pretty fascinating in the sense that obviously it kind of goes in flies in the face of general investing principles, right? In the sense that like the investors that have the best returns are the ones who double down on their best investments. As you correctly said, like the founders who have been the most successful have been really focused on like kind of one thing at a time. Right? Even Elon Musk, who sort of does a lot of things and probably has more ability than any other entrepreneur in the world, he still was really focused on Tesla for a little while, and then on SpaceX for a while, and then maybe X slash Twitter now. But like he you got to be pretty focused. But if you don't, but the right point is like a lot of startups fail. So being more diversified in your career and job goals and what you're doing, as long as it's in the same general area, right around sort of, in your case, veteran-owned startups in some ways, leads to a you won't have quite as many highs maybe, but certainly not nearly as many lows.
Right. Exactly. And so again, it all goes back to team,
Yeah.
right? I was able to not focus 100% on Shield Core security because my brother was leading it. He was the CEO. He was leading the charge. He shouldered the burden. I was there every step of the way and helped tremendously. But at the end of the day, like he was the one who was like the 100% focused person. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing with other startups. So, and that kind of goes to one of the companies I started, which is Illuminaire Technologies. That's like my Berkshire Hathaway. That's like my personal portfolio where it's like every startup that I've launched that I have equity in, the ownership of like the veteran fund, my piece, all of that is focused through this one entity that I have 100% control of. And it goes back to what you were saying, which is you need to become the CEO of your own life.
Yeah.
And so the way I really looked at it was like, okay, I want to launch, and this was the goal with Illuminaire. I want to launch 1,000 companies that will positively impact humanity. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to go and start 1,000 companies myself. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to find great people and I need to like connect them to my platform and be able to help them either as an advisor or putting them through an accelerator or as an investor to be able to kind of build that portfolio. And so that was the original thesis. And, obviously it's still growing today, but I think that, the lesson there is you really do need to be the CEO of your own life, whether you're a full-time employee looking at stock options, that's great. But, I always tell new founders that I'm talking to is really look at your life, like, and answer this question, like, what is your masterpiece? A good friend of mine planted that seed in my brain, and I actually didn't have a good answer for that. But I do think like most people go throughout their entire life and they never think about that.
Yep.
They ask the question of like, what do you want to do when you're older? And that's normal. And a lot of people don't know. But I mean, like, you're alive in this world right now and you're doing all of these things and your mind is so distracted, but like, why? And where are you going? And why do you exist? What is your legacy? And so I think it's important that if you don't have a good answer to that, like, stop this video, go on top of a mountaintop somewhere and like ask that question until you figure it out and then come back to the real world. And then you'll be able to navigate it a lot better.
Yeah. I mean, certainly a theme that I think about a bunch is like, I don't want to just go through life getting like blown in whatever directions, like a sailboat, an uncrewed sailboat would, getting blown around, whatever the wind takes me. I want to have control over my destiny, where I'm going, and lead it to where I want to go. And so on that note, I mean, would love to talk really briefly. I mean, funny, we're going to run out of time, which is too bad because I have a bunch of questions I want to get to, but talk with you, like when you think through the most successful founders you've come across and you've seen, I don't know how many, 1,000 companies at this point, even more, 1,500. What are the things that the best, most successful of those founders have done? If there are like one or two things, and on the flip side, by the way, also, what are the things that all the failed founders have failed to do or failed to take advantage of?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a core, like if I were to like say like, what's a common denominator? I think all of them have been good in some respect at sales, and not just sales like I'm going to make 1,000 cold calls, but sales in like they can pitch really well, right? They can recruit a team. They've got charisma. They've got that leadership. You're not going to be, a person that doesn't have those leadership skills and lead a company. You're just not. And you can develop it over time. I've actually seen some technical founders who weren't like natural born leaders with that charisma, but they because that's what they wanted to do, they kind of had the resilience to just keep going. And eventually they learned it. And those are actually some of the most powerful founders, are the ones that have the technical chops, but then they've learned like the street, charisma chops. And those are folks that I highly respect because they're a master in both of those worlds.
But in a sense, what you're saying is like these need to be. So one I completely agree. By the way, like I'm a huge actually conversation recently on the same topic. Huge believer in the idea of just the power of storytelling and being good at telling a story, because you need to tell it for all those audiences to build a good company. It needs to be to your investors, to your team. Yeah, I mean, who else is involved? I guess your customers, obviously. Everyone needs to be able to understand that story. But having that perseverance to get past you being an introvert, let's say, and accepting that and saying, you know what, to be in this role, I need to be better than that, and I'm going to go learn how to do this and do it well, is a really good point. I mean, I was actually talking with a founder recently, and they were sort of asking for my advice, but they couldn't even articulate what they were doing, and it's like, I can't even give you good advice in this call because I can't really understand what you're even building. And if you're at that step, you can't even get further than that.
Yeah.
And is that the same sort of idea on the flip side of what people do wrong? Like, what are the big failure points, right? 90% of startups fail, and a lot of it is just luck and timing and a bunch of other things. But are there certain things that the failures in retrospect, like, oh, that was obvious, I should never even invested or put my time into them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a couple different factors there. Assuming that you're a good, resilient founder, that will, not stop and continue growing, and you're competent and you can lead teams and all of that, right? Like, let's just take like table stakes there for a moment. If you're working on the right opportunity, then you'll figure it out and you'll grow, and you'll be able to be successful. Where I think like that person fails is if they're just barking up the wrong tree and they're not pursuing the right opportunity. Now, they could always pivot or shut the company down and work on something new and then keep going.
Yep.
Right. So I would say it kind of depends if you're looking at like the company as a failure or the founder as a failure. But one story that I'd like to share, and this comes from my partner, Justin, at the Veteran Fund. He was having coffee with a Navy SEAL who was transitioning out of the military. And, he shared this anecdote, which I think is brilliantly encapsulates like something for entrepreneurs, which was a lot of people think that Navy SEALs have some kind of special ninja power and that they're like some kind of crazy, like elite person. But the reality is that, we're just brilliant in the basics. And so like when you can master the fundamentals and just be really good at the fundamentals, and that could be anything from like creating the right systems and processes and like having good storytelling. Like those fundamentals are so important that, it often gets overlooked. And so some of the best founders that I know just have really good systems and processes in place. And because of that, they're able to kind of take the bird's eye view of what's going on and be able to like steer the ship in the right direction at the right time. Where I think founders failing is when they get overwhelmed, which is, super easy to do, especially with a tech startup where you're raising money and, you have to deploy the money and you have to build and grow. It's easy to get overwhelmed, but the only way to manage that kind of workflow and that workload is you have to have good systems and processes.
So, I mean, this begs the question you kind of hinted at too, but like, what are the fundamentals, right? And you can only master a few fundamentals to be really good at it anyway. So if you boil down, these are the fundamentals every startup that you talk to should be good at and figure out how to do or read a book about or whatever it is. Like, what are those fundamentals that the best founders have nailed?
I look at it as like what is your weekly operating dashboard, and it kind of gets broken down into a couple big categories. There's your team, there's your product, and there's your traction, right? And then there's like the finance piece if you're raising money, making sure that you have revenue, right? But if you have, let's say, a long-term goal or a goal that you want to achieve at the end of the year, right? We want to get to $1 million in revenue. Okay, well, let's break that down. What does that mean for, the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? Like, where do you need to be? And then like take that and then break that down into weekly tasks. Okay, if we're going to be at $1 million in revenue, that means that we need to have 100 clients by the end of this year. But we know it takes 6 months to get a client on board, which means that we need to get 50 clients by the end of 3 months or by the end of 6 months. And if we're going to get that, we know that it takes 1,000 emails or 1,000 phone calls to get one client. And so you can actually like measure these
Yeah.
things and make sure that you're doing the right short-term thing that leads to that end goal. And so they all kind of tie together because like your hiring strategy is going to reflect that goal. Your product building strategy is going to reflect that goal. And, eventually like that will also ultimately lead to what's your fundraising strategy, right? Are you raising the right amount of money at the right valuation to get to the right point in time and piece of traction to then go out and raise the next round or get acquired, whatever that pathway looks for you. So it all really does take this kind of masterful orchestration of teams, people, and processes. And that's really hard to do. And it can be very overwhelming.
So Ryan, that makes a ton of sense. Walk me through then how do you judge from an outsider's perspective that a founder has those fundamentals nailed? Like how do you actually judge on a VC call that founder has it nailed? Or how does a banker giving funding to a services company understand that company has that nailed? What do you look for? How does a founder showcase that they have it nailed or admits that they don't and they have things to learn still? What do you look for?
Yeah, well, at the Veteran Fund, the very first thing is we look for a military veteran or a spouse on the leadership team. And that's not to say like veterans have everything figured out, but like for us, there's if you're going to start with any cohort of founders, like you probably want to start with someone that has, really good leadership training, that's been through the best like leadership accelerator in the world, someone that can work with a team, someone that can dedicate themselves to a higher purpose, and someone that knows what it means to be resilient. And so for us, like that, even though it's like such a niche, that's actually good because it like eliminates like 99% of the noise for us. Whereas you have all these other VCs chasing the same deals. And so for us, though, we're very focused on that. So just starting off with a cohort, that's what we look for. I think proof is in the traction ultimately. And I think that's the shortcut if I were to say there was one, because like if someone has a team of 6 people and they were able to get to whatever, $100,000 in revenue without raising any capital, and, they're all full-time, and, there's like little telltale signs that we look for that kind of indicate that there's an exceptional founder team. And so like for us, it's a framework thing. Like how do we quickly assess this? So resilience and leadership, is there a military veteran? Do they have entrepreneurial experience? We love second-time founders. And so there's, tons of information out there that shows second-time founders tend to be more successful.
What do you think, really quickly, sorry, what do you think it is about a second-time founder that makes them better and have a higher chance of success?
It comes down to just experience and having more reps and kind of being through that process before. And we have one founder that we invested in that had a successful first exit. And so we know, okay, he's been through startup through exit. He's hired people, he's raised money, he's done all these things. So like the founder risk is much lower on them because we know that he knows what he's getting himself into. There's not going to be some, burnout moment necessarily. And, for us, that's great. Now we don't exclusively look for that, but when we see it, we're like, a light bulb goes off. Okay, this is interesting.
Like plus one on our checklist of like things we want to look for. That's exactly. A plus one. Doesn't guarantee it, but helps.
Exactly. And then, for us, like we bring, we integrate consciousness and mindfulness into our fund, which I think is unique for venture. You're starting to see it more and more, but as you know, we have Deepak Chopra as one of our LPs, and we're working with him on creating some mindfulness frameworks for founders, because we believe that, if you take a veteran entrepreneur, right, they've got the resilience and leadership, like check, okay, they've got the raw materials, but then you're able to then wrap them around this business network, whether it's Founder Institute or Plug and Play or just our own personal networks. Now they've got access and really great networks. But then if you can optimize them in a human performance way for using techniques that are proven to improve your performance, whether it's meditation or working out or other things that kind of bring you into that flow state, then you've got really what we think is a super soldier entrepreneur. And if we can find more of those and fund them at scale, then I think you eliminate a lot of that team risk, but you still have the market risk. And so that's where we have to we're not experts in every market, but based on the traction that they get, you can kind of see like, are they starting to break through? What does the retention look like? So there are other things like, that aren't like soft leadership things that are more like, okay, like, no, seriously, like what's your traction? And unfortunately, some founders will lie about their traction. And it's not until you kind of dig into due diligence, like, oh, these users are actually not paid. And, oh, you actually didn't build this. This is on some other like, platform. And so you just have to be really careful.
I love that you're bringing kind of mindfulness into your investing. I mean, is there a way to figure, like, do you ask the people you're investing in, like, hey, like, what do you do on your free time? Do you have hobbies? And I don't know if that's good or bad thing. Like, I would actually say don't really have many hobbies, which is I worry about my own mindfulness long term, because I basically have like work in my family, and those are the only things I really have time for, in many cases right now, and then friends a little bit on the side. But I think it's really healthy to probably have hobbies. But I mean, how do you judge that when you talk to people? Like, I get that you bring them, if they get money from you, you bring them extra mindfulness training and other things they can do to really become a slightly less high anxiety and stressed founder. I'm sure it's still up there, but how do you judge for that? Or how does a founder come to you with that already prepared and that mindset already built into what they're doing? So if they don't, even if they don't get money from you, how can they build that resiliency?
Fortunately, it's becoming more and more mainstream. So we'll just straight up ask them, like, do you have a mindfulness practice? And, some of them have said no, and others have said yes. In fact, one of them, a founder that we were talking with that, was really interesting. He said mindfulness saved his life. And so it's like, okay, like that's someone who like takes it very seriously. And like, so I think there's a lot of different levels to that. And it's not all like, okay, let me like sit on a mountaintop and meditate. It could be working out, or it could be, art. It could be other things that help you get, take the edge off and get into that flow state. So it doesn't have to be like the woo-woo part. But I do think that there are some things that you should be looking at as a founder of like, okay, how do I optimize my performance, and how do I bring my best self to the table every single day?
So I'm going to have to ask you that question then. What is, as a 4X founder who has 4 companies you're still running basically, and a full-time job at Founders Institute and family, what are those things? It must be music is one of them clearly, but like what are the things that put you in a flow state and keep you rejuvenated so you can get up the next day and be excited to go to work and get things done and continue to push the ball forward?
Yeah. The main thing I think that's really important is gratitude. And that's like one tool in your toolkit. But like my daily routine is I'll wake up, I'll meditate for, 10 or 15 minutes. Sometimes I'll go in the sauna. Not everyone has the luxury of having a sauna in their house. So, but it is what it is. I've derived a workout routine. I call it the executive workout, which is like 15 minutes, 3 days a week. And like, you can get super jacked. It's all, strength training. And like, there's all these like optimizations.
Can you publish that? I want to follow Ryan's lesson for that. Send it over.
It's on the roadmap actually, as part of our this whole like mindfulness thing, but it's a combination of mind, body, and spirit. And I think there's you need to find balance with all of that. My kids are amazing. Sometimes it gets a little crazy, but I find that you sort of need breaks from certain things. And if you've been working for 12 hours straight, take a break, right? Go and spend time with your kids, go do whatever you need to do. That kind of role switching can actually be helpful and kind of refreshing you a little bit. So, and then also like a big piece of what I've done is a lot of breath work. So that has helped with like some capacity building, I think, and just kind of maintaining sort of that like, calmness under pressure.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things. And then everyone at the fund has their own like kind of mindfulness practice, whether it's a cold plunge, which is getting really popular now, or it's just like waking up and taking a walk. So everyone has their own thing. And I think there's not really one size fits all. But I do think it's important to take time for yourself, investing a little bit of time in yourself. And that can go a long way over time.
Yeah, no, it's something so critical. Not enough people probably do it. And it's, once again, I think at least it's a long game to be a successful entrepreneur. I mean, I wish I was a overnight success Mark Zuckerberg, but the truth is like, I'm not. I'm too far in my career to ever be called that. So instead, it's a long game, and recognize that like, hey, there's so many things that have built me to this place that I can have these great conversations with people like you. Like, I mean, even thinking back on it, I'm like, oh man, like for so many people, you might laugh at this, but I kind of laugh at it, which is like the fact that I get to spend this time with you right now, having this conversation. So many people would love to be in my position because you work with so many founders on a regular basis, and it's because like you're a badass, and to be able to sit there and talk with you and learn this stuff from you. I'm lucky enough that over all these years I put myself in that position to be able to have these conversations with really smart people like you and other folks. But it took for all those out there, like, man, Ryan, if I were trying to get in touch with Ryan from, myself from 15 years ago, Ryan probably wouldn't have had time for me. He would have said, yeah, go sign up for one of my courses and you can go learn about this stuff. And it takes time to build that and to get to that point in your place where your life, where you get to meet and interact with some of the smartest people. For you're interacting with Deepak Chopra. I mean, he's one of the most famous people. And like, I'm sure for you, like that's incredibly badass to be able to be someone you talk to on a regular basis with him. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I feel the same way. And it all comes down to this, is like really like fulfilling your life purpose. We have 3 core principles at the Veteran Fund. It's leadership, purpose, and resilience. And if you can, if you kind of boil those down, right? Like leadership is being able to lead teams, being able to lead your life. Resilience is like being able to wake up and do it every day, no matter what. And then purpose is like really the fuel behind all of that. Like it's the why, right? Like, why are you doing what you're doing? And so we'll even ask portfolio companies. And then what ends up happening is that kind of like breaks everything down to like first principles. It's like, okay, why are you doing this? Okay, great. If you want to achieve that, then maybe think about it in this other way. And, I think that goes not just for company building, but for every aspect of someone's life.
So this is a really good segue into a question I've been wanting to ask you since you mentioned this a while back. Bring you back to early in our conversation. You mentioned how you were a struggling founder, not making any money. Your buddies who were making a ton of money, tech sales, all that other stuff. Sort of philosophical question. Do you think nowadays they would trade places with you? Or do you think they're like, man, I love being a tech sales guy. I'm so happy I did that. I never went to do a startup. I worked for the man, whatever. But they maybe had a really good life, or maybe they got super burnt out and are now lost in the wilderness. Not to judge everyone's different path, but like you took the harder road earlier on in life and led you to a place of, it seems like, a ton of success and frankly a lot of peace. What do you think your friends either have said or do say to you or think about these meandering paths in life?
Yeah, I do think I front loaded a lot of the pain, which is good. And would they want to trade places? Like maybe not. I mean, maybe not. We can't say for sure, but I do know that like I'm glad I'm not in their shoes, right? So I mean, I think that might say something. But look, everyone chooses their own path in life, and I think there's something to be said about taking the hard road early when you can, right? Like before you have, a wife and 3 kids, where you can't really take those risks, and like just spending your early years doing everything that you can while you can. Because I can tell you, as soon as you've got a mortgage and a wife and 3 kids, it's like you're not stuck, but you have much more limited options. Yeah. And so you want to get to a place. And I always kind of knew this, actually. This kind of goes back to my why. I always wanted to be a stay-at-home dad. And I never wanted to be like the dad that's like, sorry, kid, I got to go to, I have to fly to DC or whatever and miss your birthday. So what that means is like, you need power over your time. You need power over your life. And all of those things are extremely important. So I knew like, okay, well, if that's where I want to be in my mid 30s, then it means I need to get going now and start doing that hard work now. And, there's this concept, it's basically around like the law of growth, which is whatever you put your time into will grow, like undoubtedly, like it literally, it has to, and it will, as long as you are relatively competent, you've got a pulse, and you're doing good work. At the end of the day, like just feed the thing that you want to do, and feed it a lot, put in the hours, get to the 10,000 hours or whatever of mastery, and you're going to get there 100%, like undoubtedly. And life will change. Other doors will open. You may have to pivot, but at the end of the day, like if you put in the time and energy and focus, like you will absolutely get there. You just have to start.
And 100%, you got to start now. You got to start now because it compounds, right? Like all of this, once again, is one of my favorite things that I talk with everyone about. Everything compounds in life. Not working out compounds, and you get more and more tired and unhealthy and all these other things. Working out compounds. Working hard at a job compounds and leads you to new, bigger things. And those opportunities present themselves if you're willing to do that. I mean, so many people I think are unwilling to take that effort and time and sort of look at you or me and say, oh man, they're just so lucky. They got all this stuff. They're so lucky they have these things. It's like, well, yeah, but we were all struggling at different points. We put so much time and effort in to get there. And yes, we're in a really lucky and privileged place today, but it took work to get there. I love, by the way, that you were so focused and thoughtful early in your career about what you're doing. I would not say I was necessarily, but I do completely agree with your point, by the way, about the family stuff. I feel so lucky that I was telling my wife this last night, I don't have to travel at all, ever, if I don't want to. And the fact that I can be home every day and see my kids is awesome. And and frankly, I also love the fact that it means I can work harder at the things I really enjoy, which like getting on a plane can be kind of fun and going cool places, but like going from one conference center in a random hotel to another is not actually that interesting for me. So like, I'd rather be doing that on calls with people like you and spending time there. And means like I get to walk upstairs from my kitchen to my office, and like that's my commute. Like that is amazing, I think. But I guess the sort of question then for you is like, where does this like this actually may be a good way into this, right? This is such a peaceful, thoughtful, meditative way of thinking about your career and being that entrepreneur of your own career. How does that compare and contrast? When you go back to something like from really early in your career, right? You were on a PBS show about like PBS documentary about Chinese entrepreneurs. How does that differentiate? And Chinese entrepreneurs, I think, are very famous for working incredibly hard, right? I think they used to tell me I'm going to get this, I'm going to bungle this, but like what is like the 997 or something, right? Like 9 to 9, 7 days a week or something like that was like the mindset. And man, like China has grown so fast, and the entrepreneurs are so successful and so hardworking. What did you learn when you're doing that? First of all, how did you even get in that PBS documentary? Is that partially because of putting yourself in the right place? And then what did you learn and compare and contrast between kind of the pros and cons of both different mindsets, sort of a more Americanized one, being more thoughtful and peaceful and being well-rounded versus all the hard work? Or maybe I could be totally off. Maybe the Chinese one, have that same mindset too.
Yeah, really good question. I think so. How I got there, when you're on the right path, things start to happen
Totally.
that are like, you get like, I was always looking out for signs, right? And it's like, okay, is this a sign I'm on the right path? And you can tell it's like a level of friction that you're facing. And it's not that friction's bad. Like friction actually means like, okay, I need to like go around this, or I need to figure out a way to do it. And this opportunity, I forget how I originally came across it. I think it was like but at the time my fiance or my girlfriend, but I think it was like my now father-in-law like sent it to me.
Wow.
I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so I went and I just like kind of told them about my story at Founder Institute and working with all these entrepreneurs. And I went in and I interviewed, and they selected me and another woman who was a fashion designer in San Francisco to go over to China to meet with entrepreneurs. And it's not just tech entrepreneurs, but there was like a co-working space that had an oddly familiar logo to the Founder Institute.
That's hilarious.
And there was some fashion designers, there was like this like hairstylist. So it was like kind of across all these different components. And it was a really great experience because I got to see China in like a very like chauffeured kind of way where I didn't have to think about anything. It was just like delivered to me. But it was interesting talking to them, and what I came back with were a couple things. First is that they have the same similar struggles that we do, which is time and attention. But like there's also like, especially with some of the people that were more like art focused, like the hair designer or the wedding dress, like you could just tell they loved what they did, and that really fueled them. And that's where like your comment about hobbies, it's like, for them, their hobby is their work. And like, I mean, that's great. I mean, that's a huge level of success.
Is that a secret to success to some extent? Is like, obviously it's great to have hobbies in some ways, but also if your job is your hobby, is that even better? Because you can spend more time on it and you love every minute of it. Even if you're not making any money, you're just like, I want to practice doing great hair because
I
like,
think so. Yeah. And it as long as that feeds into your greater goal, right? Because some people could be like, I want to be a great pickleball player, right? But, and that's a hobby, but are you going to become a pickleball instructor? Maybe, if you're happy with what pickleball instructors make, and maybe they make a lot of money. I don't know. But, it has to line up with like all the other goals that you have with your life. And so that's why everyone's like, oh, I want to become a VC and invest money in impactful startups that will change the world. It's like, yeah, that's kind of the dream job, right? Um, and going to China was great. I mean, I think there's something. It was interesting how much the government was involved and how important having a relationship with the government was there.
Mm,
I almost feel like the people that are doing the 997, it's actually sort of fear based rather
mm,
than passion based.
yeah.
And while I think that, like, it's good to work hard, I also think that it's not necessarily healthy to work like that. And like in the short term, we're like, oh man, China, they're putting in all these hours and they got, over 1 billion people, like watch out. But when you look at the systems, right, I believe that our system of empowering individuals, giving them freedom of choice, like really, and like what that is, it's essentially liberty. And if you have the freedom to be who you are and do what you want to do and like, become what you want to become, there's something very human and very powerful about that. But if you're in a society that restricts that then you're in this environment where, maybe there's ways that they can get short-term gains. But I ultimately think that the system that wins is the one that aligns more with our human nature, which to me is being free and being able to make your own life choices.
So obviously, you and I would agree on that. But then how do you compare and contrast that to some extent, like with, I mean, I know we're kind of going down a political direction to some extent, but like the European model, right? Where I think there's this, you have on one hand, China, who works so hard and has made so many impressive gains over the past sort of 30 years as a country, nation, built amazing businesses and companies. Um, in Europe, which hasn't done a lot of that, but obviously has a lot of that freedom in mindset, but also it's a very different mindset around work, right? They much more about taking your vacations, enjoying your time off, enjoying things outside of work. How do you kind of compare that? But they have lots of the same democratic freedoms that we have in the United States. How do you compare and contrast sort of those three systems then?
I mean, I would love a 4-day work week and a 6-week summer. That sounds
Right.
great
And,
to
and
me.
and a big salary too, right?
Yeah. I mean, that sounds great. And I think, um, there's pros and cons, right? The pro is that you get a really good work life balance. The con is that they're not going to make as much economic progress as us. And which is better? I think it's actually relative. And it comes down to like, I would almost look at it more on the individual level, like what environment will allow you to achieve your own version of success.
Totally.
And for entrepreneurs in Europe, maybe that is, spending that 6 weeks with their family and still building a meaningful company. Maybe it doesn't become a unicorn, but maybe it's worth a couple $100 million or whatever it is, right? Like I think that that's great, and I think that they are, have the rights and the freedom to do that. Ultimately it comes down to like, are people able to kind of choose their own path and unlock their potential? And I think that's like the beginning stages of entrepreneurship, because it really is an art of self-expression. You're building this thing that you love, that's almost a part of yourself, and you're bringing it into reality. And whether you take a 6-week long European vacation or you don't take any vacation at all, it almost like I would say it almost doesn't matter,
Mm.
as long as you're achieving the things that you want to achieve and you feel that level of success.
Yeah, no, well said. And I think that's true for everybody in life, no matter what country you live in, to some extent. What kind of leading this sort of home to some extent? What would be when you think through everybody, right? And since we hope everyone's an entrepreneur for your own career at minimum, what are the things that people should be thinking about or considering to make a decision about whether they should jump into being a entrepreneur where you're founding a company, taking on dollars from someone else, making money, taking on employees who rely on you to build things? What are the things that people should be considering to make that decision? Like when you say, like, I'm going to go not just entrepreneur my career, but actually entrepreneur a company into existence,
Yeah.
what are the things people should be asking?
The first thing is like everyone's personal situation is different. The young 20-year-old versus the mid 30s with like a wife and kids. The how much money do you have in your savings? Is this something that you really want, or are you just chasing something because you think it's going to make money?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, like that's where I think it comes back to like the why of it. If it's like, hey, I really hate my job and I want to do something else, like that could be a motivating factor, but that's not the reason you should do it. Like the reason you should do it is because wow, this really interesting opportunity presented itself. I'm really passionate about this and I'm exceptionally qualified to go out and do it. And I can't stop thinking about it. That's when you should start a company, or that's when you should at least like go down the path of doing it and then figure out like, okay, next step is like, can this make money? And like, you can figure that out pretty easily by just doing basic customer development. And then the question of like, well, should I just bootstrap it or should I raise money? The question then you need to ask is like, can I scale this to $50 million in, 5 to 7 years? And if I can't, or I don't want to, then that answers your question. Just bootstrap it. And then that's a whole different go-to-market strategy when it comes to hiring and getting customers and building and your timeline to like quitting your job to do it versus, going the fundraising route.
But I would say it seems like a little unfair to be like, for someone to think, well, can I get this to $50 million when, what percentage of companies ever get to $50 million in revenue, right? Like we might imagine, I mean, maybe you're sort of saying founders who can pretend in their own head that they actually can pull that off and have the insanity to think they can do that. Maybe that's what you're saying. Because it's so hard to do, right? It's probably 1% or less of companies that ever get that revenue number.
And I think that like the reason I say that is because that's what VCs and investors will want to see.
Sure.
Angel investors, not so much. Angel investors would be happy with like a 3 to 5x return in like 2 to 4 years. But VCs are like, no, this has to be like a home run, which is like $1 billion plus, just because of their economics, which means that, you need to be somewhere between 50 to $100 million in revenue. And if you don't fit that mold, don't raise, venture capital. You could raise friends and family or maybe some angels if you want. But I would just say like, just go build something that matters, that you care about, that you can sustain yourself and others, that can grow. And then that's really all you can ask for.
Yeah. And you control your own destiny, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And not having investors means you have that control. So what is the one piece of advice? The question I like to ask at the end of every single call that I have. What is the one single piece? We could boil it all down into one thing. Someone just fast forwards to this part of our conversation. What is the single piece of advice that you would give to every founder for achieving entrepreneurial excellence?
Do meaningful work that matters to you, that you're not afraid to work really hard at achieving.
Yeah, no, I love it. Ryan, how should people find you? Where can they find Ryan, get in touch with you, get you to give them some advice on a personal level, or even better, maybe better, maybe worse, I'm not sure, money as well. I'm not sure if it's better to have you as someone to give advice to or actually take money from you. I'm not sure which one's preferred. But where can folks find you today if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, the best way to do is probably LinkedIn. I'm not big on Twitter. I try to keep a low profile, but LinkedIn I'm pretty active on. So yeah, it's just Ryan Micheletti. And then for any veteran entrepreneur out there that's interested in either starting a veteran-led company or maybe you're raising capital, just go to veteran.fund/startup. And then there's a way to submit your company to us and we can review. And then we also run a bunch of events and for founders in general that maybe aren't veterans and you're interested in starting a company, go to fi.co, because like we specialize in that early kind of idea stage to MVP stage where maybe you're thinking about starting a company, but you want to make sure before you quit your day job that it's validated and you're ready to go. And so we have a whole like series of content and programming that can help you do that in a really exceptional way.
Well, I highly recommend everyone goes and does those things. Get in touch with Ryan. I really appreciate this call. I've learned so much more about you and have even greater appreciation than I already did about you and kind of the peacefulness, I think, in it sort of Zen-like. I actually truly, my view is now like a Zen-like manner you bring to being a founder for companies, all these other things that you currently have your hands in, and yet still have time to jump on a call like this and have this discussion and everything else. So Ryan, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. And I'm so excited to see all the other things that are in your future build that hopefully I can participate in one way or the other.
Adam, thank you so much, man. This has been great.
Cool. Thank you.